Some of you may know next to nothing about blockchain, but that's the beauty of Rotary. We get together to learn about something new that in this case might revolutionize how the world does business. What especially intrigues me about blockchain is its emphasis on trust and transparency, which certainly follows our four-way test of being the truth and being fair and beneficial to all concerned. To begin our meeting, let's welcome Rotarian Kurt Martig for our reflection. Kurt?
Thank you, Ruth. This past February, which was just 5 years, 5 months and 10 years ago, we heard from Cliff Allen, who is a professor, actually the dean at Portland State University, speak about supply chain management. In the talk, he briefly spoke about the use of blockchain in the supply chain management processes, which itself was a surprisingly interesting talk. But he also said that every time a speaker uses the word blockchain, an angel gets its wings. So there, Ruth gave a couple angel their wings, and I've just done that same. So we're getting that done, taken care of early today. Blockchain is still a relatively new term and concept for many of us. I'm looking forward to learning more about it from our speaker today. What I do know about blockchain is that it was invented during a time of disarray. In 2008, as the financial system was collapsing around us, putting the economy in free fall, blockchain was invented through the creation of the world's first cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. You could say that we got a 2-for-1 deal in that situation, blockchain and Bitcoin. While blockchain and Bitcoin were released into the world during the financial crisis of 2008, it was a result of prior decades of work. It's a reminder to us all that somewhere today, well outside of the current headlines of chaos and uncertainty, quiet progress is being made on something that none of us can even conceive of today. And with any luck at all, like blockchain, it will make the world a better place. I find that exciting. And with that in mind, let's reserve some space for optimism about the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. I like that idea of quiet progress. And if any of you would like to give the reflection at an upcoming meeting, please don't hesitate to let us know. Siobhan will be sending out an email this afternoon with a sign-up form. So please be on the lookout for that and volunteer. And now I'd like to welcome any virtual guests. At this time, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself by clicking on the participants button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and raising your hand. Thank you for tuning into our weekly meeting. I don't see any guests signing on, but we'll hope that there will be, if not in the future. And in the chat box, you'll find a link to guest registration. We're eager for all of you guests to fill it out so that we can stay in touch. And in this last meeting of July, I'd like to extend a happy anniversary to everyone who joined Rotary Club of Portland this month. Please note the names of those anniversary members and reach out to one of them with a call or an email. It's a small way for us to stay connected. And look at those, 40 plus years, 20 to 30 years. Oh my goodness. We have great longevity in our club and such faithful members. Thank you all. Now we're going to enter a virtual table talk. In a few moments, all of us will disappear from here and then reappear in a virtual room with just a few other Rotarians. The Rotarians in your group will be at random. If you don't know each other, please introduce yourselves. And a minute or so before you come back to this main meeting, you'll get a visual heads up. And may I suggest a topic related to today's program? With the governor's expanded requirement for face coverings, what's the best face mask you've seen lately? Here we go into our breakout rooms. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to thank everyone who participated in our club survey last June. About 100 of you responded, a little less than half our membership, but the demographics of the survey takers was pretty consistent with the demographics of our club as a whole. So it was a good representative sample. This week, Corinne will send out an email to all of you with the survey's results, and I encourage you to review them. I've discussed these results with our club leadership team and with our club board of directors this morning. Now, as you can imagine, several themes emerged. You all, as members, noted that the quality of our weekly programs is slipping a bit. Now, those of you who were on this meeting last week remember that Program Committee Chair Will Nolan asked you all to suggest programs that reflect the diversity of topics and speakers that our membership appreciates, especially in the areas of business, politics, public affairs, technology, and racial justice. Remember that you are part of the solution. Think about who might be a good program and suggest that name to Will. Secondly, there was a continuing theme, one of the value of membership. Now, some of you see value in financial terms. Are our dues worth it? Others of you see the value of membership as return on investment for the time you dedicate to Rotary, which for most of our members is 3 hours per month outside of weekly lunch meetings. All this leads to member engagement. We have to ask our club, are we hitting the mark? Some of you asked for more variety in social and service events, better engagement for new members, and more membership diversity. Now, bottom line, all of these things are related. The quality of our programs is tied to how willing members are to participate in weekly meetings. Attendance at weekly meetings is a measure of how much people value the club and what we do in the community. And members will feel that the club is a greater value if they're personally engaged. One final note on the survey, a whopping 84% of you felt that we should balance club traditions with new ideas. The age of COVID-19 is accelerating the need for those new ideas, and your club leadership is all ears. Please know that a survey every other year is not the only way to make your voice heard. Please contact me or a board member anytime, and thank you in advance for the feedback. We're about to get into our program, and just a note that after our speaker today is finished, if you'd like to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, click on the participants button. On the top of that list of participants, you'll see your name, and you can click on the hand icon to raise your hand. I'll call on you to ask your question. Now, when you're called on, Corinne or Siobhan will unmute you, but you may also need to unmute yourself before you begin speaking. And now, please welcome Rotarian Mike Sandoval as today's chair of the day. Mike?
Well, thank you, Ruth, and it is nice to see all your faces, albeit remotely. I have missed those personal meetings downtown, and I really hope to get back to those soon. Well, I am honored and very pleased to welcome today's speaker, Tiana Laurence. I can say welcome home, Tiana, in that she is a former resident of Portland, as well as a member of this club. Tiana is a native of the beautiful state of Colorado and currently resides in Austin, Texas. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Business and Leadership from Portland State University. And shortly thereafter, while residing in Portland, she co-founded Digital Aptitude, which was a digital marketing agency with its headquarters in Portland. After selling Digital Aptitude, she co-founded Factom Inc., an enterprise software company that has been named one of the 20 most influential blockchain companies. As a blockchain pioneer and entrepreneur, Tiana's passion is building and growing great companies. She's an active angel investor and author. She is the author of Introduction to Blockchain Technology and Blockchain for Dummies, which was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. I might add, courtesy of Tiana's friend who's a guest today, David Nair, that Tiana actually coined the term blockchain. It did not exist until she uttered that word. Today, Tiana travels the world, serving as an advisor for companies and governments. In addition to her native English, she speaks French and Spanish. Today, Tiana visits us from Norway. Now, when Tiana's not working, reading, or writing, she enjoys yoga, rock climbing, and of course, being from Colorado, skiing. Today, Tiana will explain all we need to know about blockchain technology, as well as maybe throw in a tidbit or two that she thinks may be of interest to the club. So fasten your seatbelts and join me in warmly welcoming Tiana Laurence.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, guys. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you guys again and see all your smiling faces in Portland. I put together a couple slides to kind of walk you guys through that. So why don't I go ahead and share my screen, and I think I can share the deck that way. Is that okay? Okay. Can you guys see my slides now? Okay, great. Mike, thank you so much for the introduction. I thought I'd put up a couple pictures of the books that I've written and tell you guys a little bit about me. So after I left Portland, I co-founded the company Factum and was approached by Wiley to publish the Blockchain for Dummies book. And the backstory on the term blockchain. It used to be two separate words, part of computer science, to talk about how to work with data. And when we were discussing how to talk to the world about these distributed databases and how we wanted to secure information, we just had a frank conversation in our boardroom where we were debating calling it Bitcoin technology or cryptocurrency technology. And we decided that we wanted to put blockchain together as a single word and call it blockchain technology, because that was really what we were using, was the distributed ledger that Bitcoin uses to write its transactions to secure other types of information. And so what Mike has asked me to talk to you guys about today is some of the work that we did with the Department of Homeland Security and the Gates Foundation around securing IoT devices against data corruption. So what I've prepared for you is I took some of my old slides from the last presentation I gave to the National Institute for Science and Technology, where we kind of dove a little deeper into the technology and about how it worked. And so I thought I'd share those with you guys, but please stop me if you guys have questions, or you want to dive a little bit deeper, or if you want me to pull back a little bit and talk more broadly about how the technology works. But I thought this would be kind of a great place to talk, because blockchain's been around for a while. Most people understand that it's a ledger that transactions are written against, and there's Bitcoin and things like that. So if that's an okay place to start, then I will kind of start with that. So what I have on this slide is sort of like a very generalized depiction of what a blockchain is. If you look down at the bottom, there's sort of that area in orange that's a representation of the Bitcoin blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain is a distributed ledger, which is just sort of like if you've ever worked at a bank or any kind of financial institution, it's a place where you write in transactions and say, okay, I've sent $10 to Sally and Sally sent $20 to Bob, and you keep track of who sent who, how much funds, and what are the balances associated with each of those addresses. And so it's important when you're having, if you don't have a centralized authority that basically clears and settles those transactions, that you have a single source of truth that everyone goes back to and says, okay, this is the state of the balances for all of these addresses, and this is how we're going to understand who's allowed to send these kinds of transactions. So that's kind of basically how it works. There's a lot of different types of blockchains now, but in a general sense, think about everybody sharing a record. How do you have a rule set around that? How do you keep it up to date? How do you make sure that people don't have fraudulent transactions or break the system? So what we did was within Bitcoin, for example, every time you send a transaction to another party, that gets written into the Bitcoin blockchain. Since that data needs to be present on everybody who's participating in the mining of Bitcoin, that can become quite heavy and quite expensive. So think about it like if you wanted to store a movie or something like that and use the Bitcoin blockchain as the mechanism to store that, it'd cost you probably a couple $1,000,000 to do that. If you wanted to store that movie existed, basically a data snippet of it that proved its existence, it wouldn't cost you very much. So what we ended up doing was building a data layer, which you can see represented as a blue layer above Bitcoin, that let us basically write the existence of data at scale for enterprise solutions so that we could prove data sets hadn't been manipulated or changed. Now, this sounds probably not very useful to many of you guys, but it actually is pretty useful in that the Department of Homeland Security was given by Congress, they needed to basically prove that both they hadn't tampered with their own data set and that outside parties hadn't tampered with data sets. And this was really important from like a practical use case. So the one that we ended up with was with Custom and Border Patrol. And Custom and Border Patrol needed to basically prove, like they have ground sensors and they have cameras. They needed to prove that their cameras data, they hadn't deleted any of that data, and that outside parties, basically drug runners, hadn't tampered with that data also. And they needed to prove that to Congress and DHS and things like that. So that was a use case that we ended up working on and creating a solution that's implemented now, which is pretty exciting. And I helped design what that looked like. So I'm gonna walk you guys through that in just a second, but I wanted to kind of check in and see just the temperature with people, if this is making sense, or if I need to back up and talk a little bit more about how blockchain technology works or how cryptocurrency works or any of these sort of things. No, good? Okay, thumbs up, cool. Okay, so this fun picture is basically the first system that we built for DHS that I then got to present to the National Institute of Science and Technology. And so if you see on the upper left-hand corner, you see a camera that's sort of capturing an image. And we'd take that image and we'd send it in a couple different ways. So it depended on the IoT device. So these are ground sensors and cameras and other means of detecting human activity. So just I think of it as little packets of data. So we could send them through SMS, email, radio signals, or it could be captured on the device and then picked up locally. How do you make sure that that device hadn't been tampered with? And how do you know that the information that was coming off that device, like that it came specifically from that device? So what we ended up doing was at the device level, at the chip level, having each of those devices cryptographically sign each of those little packets of information so that they could prove it. And so Dell and a lot of other chip makers make very secure chips. And if they can sign at that level, it creates pretty good security that can't be broken. So we ended up taking that and then sending it to Factom, where it got secured and then written to their own databases so that they can then ping back to Factom to check that that data hasn't been messed with. So let's walk through it a little bit slower. So, you know, with all the different kinds of social unrest that we're seeing right now, the integrity of data is really important. We end up with things like deep fakes and stuff like that. It's hard to really tell what we're looking at. Is it authentic? Who created it? When was it created? Has it been tampered with in any way? Is that data set complete and whole? And I think like the current state of global affairs has really amplified the need for this kind of integrity of data, specifically when, who, and what device did it come from. So that's basically the use case that we had, was like, could we write data, prove what we call proving the negative? Can we prove that nothing within a data set has been removed? In which case we could. So what we ended up doing was at the device level, capturing each of those images, and we found that the devices created unique signatures, and we could capture a lot of information off the device that let us prove the authenticity of each of those data packets, whether it was a camera or a ground sensor or any of these other devices. So once we captured that information, we needed to send it through the wires or airways or other ways. And what we ended up doing was writing it twice initially. So we'd basically, it was simple. We sent an email that had a little tiny snippet, a little fingernail sized image of it, so that we could say, okay, is this the same one? They would send the whole one to their data set, and we would prove back and forth through just sending it to the Factom blockchain, where it'd be entered into our system and into their own system. One of the things that we wanted to make sure of was with Customs and Border Patrol. I don't know if you've ever seen a spy movie where they basically do a replay attack where they play a loop of image so that you think that nothing's happening. So what would happen on the border they could loop information so that a camera would appear as if nobody was crossing there. They could attack the device at that level. Another thing they could do is make it look like somebody was crossing, miles from where they actually were, by having the wrong device ping. So they could compromise at that level. And they couldn't tell basically what was happening. And by the time they got somebody to that location, because this is on the US-Mexico border where it's remote, they don't have roads. The Customs and Border Patrol that I met, a lot of them would hike in with their backpacks. And so they'd hike for miles to go try to catch these people, and then realize that that device had been compromised and that the people had crossed miles away in a different direction. So that was sort of like the first set, was like, can we prove, hey, has this information already been entered into our system? And if it has, then we know that we're dealing with some fraudulent information. If it hasn't, then we're going to go ahead and write it into the system and then link it between transactions. So for example, in Bitcoin, when you're writing a block of transaction, which is all the transactions that happen within a set amount of time, you layer them on top of each other, and you basically take digital fingerprints and put them one on top of another so that you can tell whether or not something has been missing from that data set. It's sort of our way of being able, we call it proving the negative. Is there anything within this file that's missing? Because if you remove one file from that data set, then it makes the whole data set basically collapse. Nothing will compute properly. You'll get a different, they call it a hash than what you typically get. Okay. So after this stuff arrives at DHS, it's stored within their data set, and anytime they need to go back and prove, hey, we haven't messed with the integrity of our system, they can basically ping back to Factom and prove their whole data set is intact, nothing's missing, everything's good, there's no duplicate information, there's no missing information, and all the information that's been written to the set has come from all known devices that have been cryptographically signed. This is a process that took us, I think it was about 2 years to complete, from proof of concept of this was an idea that we dreamed up. We prototyped the devices in our office in Austin, tested them for several months, and then deployed them on the US border with Customs and Border Patrol. So everything basically turned out well, but what we were always looking for was, hey, has anything come out missing? And it was one of the better use cases for blockchain technology. It's not the most efficient way of storing data. You end up duplicating it across systems. You're utilizing third parties to secure information that are disinterested in that information. So it can be expensive, time consuming, kind of clunky. But when the integrity of the data is really important, when you have mandates from governments and things like that, then it makes a lot of sense to do it this way. But there aren't a ton of use cases that need this kind of level of integrity and expense per transaction. So I think that's always something really important to point out with blockchain, is that we already have really efficient ways of securing data within clouds or on our own personal devices. What specifically do we need this kind of level of technology for? And that's one of those things that we did find a use case for blockchain, was around the integrity of government IoT devices when it came down to whether or not people were risking their lives and welfare. So I thought that was kind of a short little brief talk about how we use blockchain, but I'm happy to talk to you guys about other stuff and also share with you guys what I'm working on now if you're interested. You guys, questions? I'm going to scroll down the images and see if I have any questions.
Chris looks like has a question. Chris Ackerman.
Great.
So you made the comment about what you're working on now. Let's follow on with that. What are you working on now?
So I've been doing angel investing for 5 years. So after I sold Digital Aptitude when I left Portland, I invested in Factom and then became an operator in Factom as an executive. And over the last 5 years, I like emerging technologies. So I've been investing heavily in distributed technologies, financial technologies. And now I'm working on a venture fund for funding. I'm not sure what just happened. You guys still there? Yep. For funding early stage startups at scale, some within the blockchain space, some not. So a lot of the work that I do now is in due diligence and investing in technologies. So that's mostly what I've been working on.
And David, you had a question.
Well, I'm excitedly working with Tiana in that slide she put up there that talked about the micro equity fund. So I wanted her to have a chance to talk about that.
Hi, David. David's my business partner in Laurence Ventures, and we're putting together a new fund it works very differently. One of the things that I saw as an investor, an operator, was the fragility of startups. And I think we'll see that more with how the economy works. So even when you have an amazing idea, how do you, as an investor, offset the risk to reward? And so that's the thing that I've been working on with David. And I'm so glad he was able to join me. David comes from a little bit of everywhere. He was the son of a diplomat, so he's lived a little bit everywhere. Went to school in Chicago, is genius level math, and is helping me build a quant fund. So that's what we're doing. I'm not describing this well, but yeah.
Thank you. And AJ, you had a question.
Oh, hi, AJ.
Hi, Tiana. I was going to ask you to talk about what you're working on now, but you already did it, so I put my hand down. Yeah. Good to see you. Great presentation.
Mike Pendergast, you had a question. Well, Mike, I'll read his question. What are the weaknesses of blockchain, and where is it headed in the future?
Yeah. So there's two main places that I'm seeing blockchain going. I had a wonderful call this week with supply chain management. One of my close contacts in California is working in the cannabis industry. It's heavily regulated. And he had come from the venture world and finance. And so when he did a deep dive into cannabis to try to understand all the different regulations, it became an overwhelming amount of regulation that they have to comply with. Basically, from seed to when they ship it out, they have to document each stage that the plant goes through and all the hands that touch that plant throughout the supply chain. So he's built a really incredible utility that works very similar to what I described earlier around IoT devices. Of, did this data come off this device? Where is this device located? Does this person have the authority to access this device? These sort of things. So in the same way, he's looked at that use case specifically for cannabis, and he wanted to build that use case around cannabis because there's so many other, if he could get it right for cannabis, he knew he could get it right for almost any other industry where you wanted to basically track from the origin of where a commodity came from all the way to the end consumer that utilize that commodity. So that's one major use case that blockchain works great for, because there's a lot of different hands that are touching it. And the stakes are high. You have regulators coming in that are like, no, this has to be really, really right. And if it's not right, people go to jail. And then the other use case that I've primarily focused on over the last couple of years has been within financial markets. So how do we create global economic systems? Like, we're all seeing globalization. We've seen a pullback during COVID in some sense, like we're physically not going these places, but we're still interacting globally. Like, I'm able to talk to you from Norway, and David's in Austin, Texas, and a lot of you guys are here in Portland. How do we have a globally functioning economy? And so some of the stuff that I've been able to work on is a small cap global market. So you have private equity that can be traded globally 24/7, just like the tokens that are produced through like Bitcoin and other types of cryptocurrencies. They taught us that we could have small cap markets that traded globally. They're very, very volatile, but there's a massive appetite for new types of financial instruments. And then I've worked with other groups that are sort of working on similar types of problems, including how do you do identity and identity management at a global scale. So I work with another one of my portfolio companies does face recognition, so that it's a lot of face recognition technology. I'll just get into it for a second. The AI has only been trained on young white males, and since that's such a small segment of the global population, it doesn't really work many other places. So the company that I invested in has been able to get some contracts with governments that have darker skinned people, and any government that's working, like half the population is going to be female. So if the AI can't even recognize half the population's faces, like it's a massive problem. So that's been going really well, and they're utilizing some types of blockchain technology within that. There's a lot of issues around like the security of data and the integrity of that data, and being able to share that across multiple different parties, like that those data sets are correct and haven't changed, and who's touched them when. So yeah.
Thank you, Tiana. We have a question from Reem, and then one more from Mark Gabriel. Reem?
Had to be unmuted. Thank you, Tiana, for your great presentation. My question is about if you can share an example, or if you have ever helped support a startup that is focused on empowering and impacting vulnerable communities around the world, or marginalized communities around the world. And my second part to that question is, what are the directives on which you decide to help a business start, or like to give them your energy and support or not? Thanks.
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think Early in my investing career, I was investing in technology that I understood and markets that I understood. And I would get to know companies very slowly over time. So the identity management facial recognition company, I knew them for multiple years. I had done partnerships with them through other companies, so I'd seen them actually working. And then when they reached out to me and said, hey, can you do a capital investment? That was a much easier yes. And so doing the due diligence on the company as an angel investor takes a lot of time, because I'd want to dig into their white paper. I'd want to see their product in the works. I'd want to see their team working. And that's just been important to me. I've realized that that's not scalable. So even what I had said earlier, so it's even if you make, you've done the due diligence, they got an amazing product. The company is just crushing it. The team's great. Everything aligns. That company can still fail. And you need to have, basically, as an investor, they say the only free lunch is diversification. You have to have enough assets within your portfolio that Murphy's Law can't always crush you. so that's one of those things. What I've been working with David on is what you were talking about earlier, how do you make sure that investments are going to the great ideas and not just sort of like the segments that they usually get invested in. So one of the things that I have seen is like, there just weren't a ton of female entrepreneurs that were able to raise capital. Myself, as somebody that had to go out and raise capital, I was the only woman out pitching. And when I looked at the statistics later, it was like 2% of the companies that got funded through venture capital, even though venture capital has been going through the roof. As far as like the number of dollars invested, 2%, even though I think it's about 40% of the companies that were started by women. So that there's a massive amount of companies that are being started that just aren't being funded. And what I typically was seeing was sort of like these, I think of it as fast thinking. Basically, like, your time as an investor is really precious, and you're trying to get to know as quickly as possible. So as soon as something flags weird, you're just going to automatically say no. And you're using that fast thinking of, is this a Stanford grad? Did this person raise capital before? Have they already had success? And so you keep on getting the same people getting invested in again and again, that went to the same schools and that look the same as the venture capitalists themselves. And you sort of see these. And this is my own, experience as an investor and somebody that, as a founder of a company that raised venture capital, about 10 million for Factum. It was extremely difficult. And I spent a whole year pitching every day, probably 4 investors, at least a day, I would pitch to until we got the capital. It's not easy. So that's one of the things I want to do in the future with my fund, is make sure that we're investing in all different types of people and all different types of great ideas, so that we really aren't just deploying capital smart. We're seeing true diversification in that capital. Part of it, for a selfish reason, is like, I think through diversification, you actually have a more stable basket of assets than you would if you're only targeting geographically. So it's like 4 cities that are getting most of the capital. It's on the coast, but if you look where people are, you got me on I'm on my little box now, my soapbox. If you think about like where IP is generated, it's universal. You see it everywhere. And all different types of people. It's not just like one tiny demographic that gets funded. So that's a major passion of mine, is that. So thanks for asking.
A worthy soapbox to be on. We have time for one more question. Mark Gabriel, you had one.
Tiana, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question in regards to the blockchain. So how does it get transferred now from being just data to have a monetary value?
Okay. So there's a lot of different types of blockchains. So there's like, you got the Bitcoin blockchain, whose primary use has been writing transactions for Bitcoin. How do you make sure that, you know, everybody that has Bitcoin is supposed to have those ones, that's all set. So the monetary value of that is whatever the market cap of Bitcoin is. As long as that stays within integrity, that's how that works. Then there's very fundamentally different types of blockchain networks. I've invested in a company called Chia. Chia created a concept called farming, where they take basically spare storage on your local device and write to that. If you've ever, you know, I don't know if you remember Napster or any of these other sort of like, it's basically a shard network where a lot of people hold a little bit of information and people can share against that. So Bram, who invented that technology, is the founder of Chia. And so he's using a very similar concept with that, where people can create that sort of storage distributed across multiple different devices and use it in that way. So there's sort of like some utility there, but it's sort of like clunky, expensive cloud storage. It's not used in that same sort of sense. But maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
Mark, did you get the answer you were looking for?
So let's say, so is it going to be based on just the market shares of how many people are using it, or is it going to be by valuing the company later on? So let's say for your project right now with doing the blockchain for data for Homeland Security, can you take this data right now and put a monetary value on that?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. So when you're writing data, because it's a publicly accessible set, a data set, right? So you can go and use a blockchain explorer and take a look at it. Some of that's going to be transaction data of, you know, Bob sent Sally $20 or whatever that token is. And then a lot of it's going to look like garbage because it's going to be stored in what's called a hash. So it's not encryption, but it's going to be like fixed strings of numbers that then can be pointed back to where the data is being securely held in a private database. So you use those pointers to say, this data is intact, this data is broken. So if you're just exploring the blockchain, there's groups that have used that to basically identify illicit transactions, because there's always an on-ramp and an off-ramp of like, money goes in, money goes out, and then that's how they catch the bad guy. So that's a potential value, but a lot of what's going to be written in here is maybe not. So when we started Factom, you can write data raw into it, so it's readable. So the first thing I had them FACTOMIZE was the Declaration of Human Rights. That was during the 1940s, they put this together. So like you can read it, but most of the time it's going to be like private corporations going back and saying, hey, is my data set correct? Is this software I'm about to download, has it been tampered with? These sort of uses, but you know, it's still fairly early in the technology, and I might be missing really amazing ways of using this data later.
I am so sorry that I'm going to have to cut off our questions here, and we have more in the chat. It's an indication of a great program, and we have more questions than we have time. Thank you, Tiana. I'm going to be holding on to that phrase of a single source of truth. Oh, that life were so simple these days. And thank you, David, for joining us. We really appreciate you being a guest. Next week, we'll hear from Holly Pruitt, a life cycle celebrant on democratizing death care. So that should be another fascinating presentation. This meeting will once again be live via Zoom at noon on Tuesday. And now as we enter into a new Rotary week, please join me in opening the doors of opportunity for healing, for recovery, and peace building. As Rotarians, we are here to make our world healthier, more sustainable, and with justice for all. Thank you all for coming. This meeting is adjourned.